Hi there. In today's Procreate Dreams tutorial, I want to talk about two main things. The first one is some navigational essentials that you need to be aware of as you're working on projects, especially when it comes to having groups involved in the process. The other one is related to coloring. And in the coloring section, I want to talk about 4 different modes to be considered. And of course, there will be pro tips sandwiched in between as the flow suggests. With that said, I hope you find this helpful. So this is where I left the previous exercise. I ended up with a car that is moving from one place to another with 4 components being animated as secondary animation, which are the exhaust, the antenna, the engine intake, and also the wheels, aside from the main primary animation of the vehicle. The next thing I want to talk about is some important navigational components when it comes to the timeline and the project. The first one is, since we are dealing with grouping, and since grouping is something that is important to become familiar with, I'm going to talk about that first. So when you create a group, if you want to collapse it, you click on that arrow. You can turn on or off certain flipbooks from the stack within that group, something that could become useful. Another thing is, when it comes to the play time of the animation, if you are inside the flipbook, it would always play everything you have. But if you are on the main project, it will only play what is limited within the visibility of your timeline. So let's say, for instance, I zoom in only to this much and then play. That's what's going to play. I would have to zoom out with the 3 fingers swiping horizontally to have everything showing. However, even if you have the timeline zoomed in to only a portion of the animation, if you tap with your 4 fingers, you will see this red bar at the top side. And if you play, the red bar would reflect on the full playtime of your timeline. And you can swipe with your finger right and left. So keep that in mind when it comes to the 4 fingers full view. Another thing that I want to mention is that if you go to the settings and you change from loop to ping pong to one shot, this is one of the glitchy issues when it comes to Procreate Dreams. It doesn't implement those changes, but sometimes it does. However, in my experience, I believe that when I go to the 4 fingers view, it does play these. So for instance, if I click on the ping pong mode and hit play, sometimes it doesn't take effect here. Sometimes it does. But when I go to the 4 fingers, it does that almost all the time. Something to keep in mind. Moving on to managing the group. So let's say I want to delete all of those flipbooks except one, because I want to continue to the next exercise with the vehicle in this position here, using that flipbook specifically. What is the best way to do so? You click on that lasso tool and then you just draw over the flipbooks you want to delete. You click and hold delete content. Done. You may ask, how can I ungroup this from the group? You click and hold and you don't see any option for ungrouping. But if you click and hold on the group, you will find ungroup. And that is going to erase the group completely. Now I can click and hold and drag the flipbook back to the beginning of the timeline and then start over. Something I also want to bring up is that with 3 fingers swiping, we are visual people. We as artists enjoy visuals, right? So with 3 fingers, I get to expand the thumbnail of those vehicles or shrink them. A, this has a visual appeal to it, and B, which is more important, is that when you have a stack of things in your project, a stack of layers, and you're starting to lose track, this becomes really handy to be able to see that thumbnail really well. Moving on to the exercise, the first thing I want to continue on is the following. If you've watched my previous video, I mentioned that something I personally found fascinating is that when we are painting with a rough brush to mimic or create the wiggly animation effect, if we are drawing in this direction, the wheels, it actually tends to wiggle in a way that it seems that it's rotating backwards. And if it's being drawn in that direction, clockwise, it would seem as if it is actually driving clockwise or driving the car forward if we're going from left to right. So I made this version just a proof of concept, at least for our entertainment. Now it could just be me, but rather I believe the case is how my hand handles the drawing, and the jittering that I would accidentally create could be contributing to that. Just something to follow up on from my previous exercise. Let's get back to the vehicle. Going to that flipbook, the coloring aspect. It's important how we draw the lines, and in this case, as you can see, I can simply draw on a layer behind this car and I should be fine, especially because I have some thick lines, so it should be really easy to work with. Meaning, if I go here and on the top layer of those flipbooks and add a new one. So when it comes to coloring this car, what I want to do is to explore different options. The first one is the approach of the artist, that person that really loves to just go and spend time on making perfect coloring and just really enjoys that tedious process of coloring this way and looking for gaps and then recoloring again. That is a therapeutical process that many of us enjoy. So that is one approach. I'm gonna call it the artist. It is painful, but therapeutical. The next approach that I want to talk about is creating an outline and then you drag and drop and you fill it with that color. What we would do is you would make an outline and you can make it really thin if you want. It just needs to be touching and to be closed. And then you can drag and drop, and there it is. The third approach is the stencil approach, which means this is how animation back in the day, we're talking about like the Disney time when they were creating this amazing and beautifully colorful animation. They would draw on a plastic stencil with a really thick line, and then they would flip it over and then paint even over the black line. Even if it bleeds a little bit like that, when you flip it over to the other side, it would still show. It doesn't look good until you actually flip that stencil around. Now, can we actually flip the stencil here? No, we can't. But what we can do is to actually put that layer of outline or line art in front and show that as on top. So I'll do that now just to illustrate the idea like that. Now I'm gonna go into the line art of the car, click and hold, and then if I go and drag it up, it's gonna select that specific one. You don't want to do that. You select on the lasso, paint over. Then what we can do is to click and hold and then scroll up. There you go. Here it is, the flipping of the stencil. The line art is in front, so we don't care about the fact that technically it's not perfect. Only what shows on the camera matters. Behind the scenes, you know that meme from Homer Simpson? I also want to bring to your attention a fourth type of coloring. So let's go here. Let me deactivate the lasso tool. So the third is the stencil approach. The fourth is the blending mode. And it could take a completely different demo just to talk about all the blending modes. But I only want to touch on what matters for these exercises, so they would stay as concise as possible. Okay, so how do we do the blending mode approach? We're starting over, let's say, and then you go and create a new flipbook just for the coloring. If I go and paint, I want that convenience of the stencil approach that I mentioned. But I don't always have the ability or the luxury, if you must, of really placing that layer below the line art. Or, more importantly, let's say this vehicle is actually filled with white pixels. Let me demonstrate. Here, I'm gonna go and drag white into it, and now it's filled with white. And here, white, white. Let's actually test if it's filled with white. Okay, I'm gonna go to the Flipbook below and then create a new Flipbook, and then I want to color with red. See that? Okay. Now we're dealing with the problem of, let's say you have imported this or exported this as a JPEG, this car. And JPEGs, if you don't know, they do not carry transparency. Only certain types of images carry transparency. So in this case, the line art doesn't work for me. And you don't want to go through the hassle of cleaning that up. It's just time consuming. What is the solution? Well, you've come to the right place. Blending modes is the solution, my friends. Delete frame. I'll just actually delete the whole track here. And by the way, something I want to bring up while you're listening, if you are. Some of the undos that I keep in my videos are extremely important. If you don't see me doing undos, we're gonna have this problem of watching a tutorial that you think is perfect and every line is falling to the right place. You go to demonstrate and you feel like crap. You feel like, oh, I make so many mistakes, but Ihab or anyone you're watching, they didn't make any mistakes. If I don't show you the undos or the cleanups, yes, I do a lot of editing out of respect for my viewers' time to really cut out all the unnecessary fat. But certain things I want to make sure that people know that it is perfectly fine to make mistakes, perfectly fine to undo, and even find out that you make a bad call. Just a side note. Okay. So if I want to color this using the blending modes or using the stencil approach, but on something that is still, as of now, one more time here, I'm just gonna test it out. As you can see, I have white pixels within the body of the car, but I have to paint over it, or I have to find a way that I can just paint without really clearing the white. Let me just color over it. What I'm going to do is to change the blending mode. The blending mode is, you can think about it as a chemical reaction between images. And that chemical reaction, non-destructive because we can always change it, that reaction would give us multiple options, and depending on the brightness or the coloration of the pixels from one layer to another, they would react differently. So what I want to do now is to pick the blending mode that would allow the red pixels in this case to transcend through the white pixels. So how do we do that? All right, now that it's done, click and hold on the Flipbook and go to track options. And of course, this is one of the greatest improvements on the Procreate Dreams, which is the overhaul on the Flipbook, which included the fact that we can change the blending modes. So on normal mode, this is what we have. I would really encourage you to play around and fiddle with those results until you find the blending mode that works for you. You can certainly look up the science behind how each one of those blending modes work. Look at this, it's kind of funny. But what we're looking for is the darken. There you go. And in case you actually had that situation where you color on the wrong frame or wrong flipbook, you can simply make a selection, 3 fingers swipe down, cut, and then go into the right one, and then swipe down, paste. Now it would require placement in some cases, but in this case it's working just fine. Fiddle with it just a little bit. And also keep in mind that when we do cut and paste, they go into the layers, so it's good just to be safe to just merge down and be done with it. So that is how we can color. And also keep in mind that the fact that we can do painting and coloring and animation and editing in the same software, making it a standalone, that is something that really worth appreciation. So I'm really happy with how they're improving this software. All right, and that would wrap up this exercise. Thanks for watching.